What does a successful exit from your gym business look like? I'm Chris Cooper. This is Run a Profitable Gym, and I want to start a conversation about people who finish the right way. When we all open a gym, we think we're going to own this forever. This is all we're ever going to want to do. I can even remember when we moved from our personal training studio to a CrossFit gym, turning and saying to Mike, I just want to do this for the rest of my life. It felt great. But eventually, we might change our minds. We might decide to do something else. We might decide that it's time to exit because we're burned out or we're broke or we've got a job offer from a software company or we just want to go sell real estate. Other times we're forced to close down. Maybe the landlord changed our lease, or maybe the lockdowns from a global pandemic forced us to close the doors and we just couldn't get through it. We couldn't get open again. Maybe the fifth time you have a total staff turnover, you just think, you know what, I give up. I'm done with this. I'm wasting my time. There were certainly times when I felt like I would sell my business for $13. There's also times when I thought like I need to go get a real job and feed my family. Today's guest, though, had good exits. That means that they reached a point where they were ready to close their gym, sell their gym, pass it on to somebody else. I've got two guests today. One is Taryn Dubreuil and one is John Franklin. And both of them had very different exits from their gym. John, in fact, had 3 different types of exits out of his 5 gyms. And they're going to share everything with you. How they came to evaluation, who they sold to, how they had that conversation. But more than anything else, they're going to share what helped them make the decision to sell. What made them realize now it's time? There's a couple things that they have in common. Number one, they both had a clear next step. Both of them would say that if you don't know what your next step is going to be, don't sell your gym. Number 2 is they knew what their gym was worth. And they would both tell you also, like, if you don't know what your gym is worth, or if your gym is worth very little, spend 6 months making your gym saleable and valuable so that you can get some money for the hard effort that you've put into it. If you're anything like me, you see these posts on Facebook and LinkedIn, and it's a gym owner closing his gym or her gym, and they're trying to put a happy face on it. It's been a great 10 years. I'm going to miss it so much. But deep down, you know, something failed. Something went wrong. They're not deciding to quit. Something is forcing them to give up and go get a job at a software company or go sell real estate. And then you see their post on LinkedIn and it's like, hey, I'm looking for clients at my new thing. And your heart kind of breaks because it feels like their dream maybe didn't come true. So I want to share with you some stories from people who've had good exits, who moved on to something even better. And hey, who knows, maybe they'll open up a gym one day, or maybe they won't. Maybe their legacy will continue. Maybe their impact is actually growing. I can't wait for you to meet these two if you haven't met them on our podcast before. If you want to chat about this, just go to gymownersunited.com. I always love this conversation, and that is a caring, thoughtful group that will give you great feedback. Without any further ado, let's start with Taryn Dubreuil. Welcome, Taryn Dubreuil, to the podcast.
I'm super hyped to be here. I love being on the podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. So glad to hear it. Let's start with, why did you open a gym in the first place?
It's actually a really cool story, but it boils down to, like everyone else, I had this life-changing pivotal moment from finding CrossFit for the first time that I wanted to share with everyone else. My family, my brother had a near-death experience with type 2 diabetes, and my parents weren't trending on the best path either. And I came across CrossFit, and it was just like this thing that completely changed my life in that moment. You couple that with our local gym was burning down, and I was standing on the top of another building across the street with a guy I used to work with and CrossFit with, who just happened to turn around and say, there's no better time than right now. And the next thing I knew, as a 20-year-old, I was opening a gym. It's the same storyline that most of us have. You have this thing, it has the potential to change a lot of people's lives. And you just want to take that opportunity because who wouldn't want that opportunity to create that type of influence in the world, right?
Yeah. And not every gym owner we talked to in this podcast was a CrossFit gym owner, but I've shared this with you before. I think like Greg's biggest gift was not fitness. It was the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. And So you started that gym kind of from scratch. Literally, it was burning down. I think a lot of us say, the thing was burning down, but literally you watched it burn. You took that jump. We've had this on the podcast before where you shared like the first couple of years, you thought you were just going to figure it out. It didn't go well, but you did turn it around, right? So at its peak, how good was the gym? Give us some numbers.
It was about a $600K a year gym. It was producing me an income that was like anything I had never believed I would be able to do personally. We had a GM, we had full-time staff. Like we checked all the boxes of what a definition of a successful gym and gym owner would look like. And that's an incredible thing, right? Coming from the storyline of how my gym went. So yeah, at the peak, like it was phenomenal.
In fact, one of my favorite stories about you is showing up to your gym in a brand new Land Rover and the staff getting mad about the rate increase.
Yeah, that's a lesson of things you'll never do again.
Yeah, exactly. But the gym was good to you. And you even had a really awesome section in the book, Millionaire Gym Owner. But eventually, that peak was past and you decided to sell anyway. So maybe you can kind of guide us step by step through that transition from, millionaire gym owner to I'm ready for the next thing.
People ask me this question a lot is like, why exit from the gym if it was doing so well? And it's an interesting thought because there's 1,000 business books out there about how to sell a business, how to exit successfully from a business. But like somewhere out there, there's this unwritten book that denotes that as a first-time entrepreneur or whatever, like your business needs to be the thing that you just do for the rest of your life. Like I knew that I didn't want to be a gym owner for my entire life. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so that's going to look like different things. So at the end of the day, the way that I chose to exit out of this is because the storyline played out in exactly the manner that I wanted it to. You build this successful thing. The successful thing allows you the opportunities to go invest in other, investment opportunities. Together, those two things buy you money and time, and you go and find other interests with that money and time. And then at some point, you come back full circle and you're in a position to make decisions on where your time and money and energy and attention are best spent. So as far as I'm concerned, like this is an immense success story for how I wanted that business to serve me in the exact way that it did, if that makes sense. But I get asked that question a lot and I just don't see exiting it in the way that I did as a negative thing. I see it as a very successful opportunity that I was even in a position to consider this. Right. And that's an important asterisk on the story is like the business was at a point and checked all the boxes to put me in a position to be able to consider this option. Right.
Yeah. So when you started, you're 20 years old. And did you think I'm going to own this for a decade? Did you think I'm going to own it for 5 years? Or did you think I'm going to own it forever?
I mean, at the time, I thought I was going to own it forever. Mm-hmm. And what that looked like, the overall goal has always been the same. When I opened it, I was training so hard to try and punch my games ticket. And I was working with CJ Martin and I had been in San Diego for so long. San Diego was kind of where my heart lay. And I knew that at some point in my life, I wanted to live there. San Diego was amazing. So my goal has always been to get the heck out of the Canadian winter and whatever that looked like. And so that was kind of like what I knew was the end game. And I just thought that the gym was just going to be a piece of that. Turns out it's not. And that's okay. Like it helped me check the box on being able to relocate my life and build my businesses in the way that it could support that thing. Or that dream, I guess.
I think as 20-year-olds, like we just don't have the perspective to make decisions like that. So when you finally decided like, okay, it's time to exit the gym, what did you first try to sell it? Let's start there.
Yeah. I mean, you always want to try and make an income off of this thing that you have worked very hard to build, right? Yeah. So the most logical place that I started was offering it to my GM. She made the most logical sense. She had just as much, if not more passion than I did in the business and who we were serving. She had been working with mentors for the last 2 years. So she understood from a business perspective of like the moves that needed to be made to continue to grow the gym. But, you know, her life circumstances were different. She just had a brand new baby, and I can understand not wanting to bring this type of risk into your life that comes with being a business owner when you have a brand new baby. So contextually, it didn't make sense for her. And I get that. And I knew that going into it, but you make that offer anyways. I offered it to my client success manager, to my coaches, you know, and under the same lines too, they all have full-time jobs and they're comfortable with their lifestyles. They're all much older than I am. And I knew it was a shot in the dark, but you do it anyways, because they're passionate about it. Sure. They love what they do. And you take those moves. I asked a few trainers that I knew in town that might want the opportunity to own their own gym. And I had asked a few investors as well that I know were looking for great investment opportunities, which those conversations never amounted to anything. But, you know, at the same time too, and I'll be the first to admit this, I actively was not trying that hard either. I think once I had made the decision that like it was time for me to part from what to part towards what my next chapter was going to be, it came more down to a decision on time than it did on money. And so, you know, I chose not to search actively too hard for a buyer. And that's a conscious decision I made.
We're gonna come back to that, but I want everybody to just kind of put a pin in that. Like eventually your time is worth more than money. And I know if you're running a gym right now, maybe if you're struggling, that concept might just not land because you just don't understand how that's possible. We are going to talk about that with Taryn. But Taryn, I know like some gym owners, when they have another opportunity or they want to move, they'll take any option to sell. They might finance the gym themselves and let people make payments. Like, why did you choose just to exit and that's it? The story ends here.
It came down to time was truly what it was. At the end of the day, that's what it was about. You know, I knew that if I were to sell it, there was going to be some involvement of myself in it for a period of time. Being a small town, there's like, you can't get away from the icon factor no matter how hard I tried. I owned this business for 14 years in a small town. And so I wanted to make sure it was successful if I was going to, like that transition was successful if I were to sell it. So the whole concept of like me having to stick around to ensure that transition to be successful really did not weigh heavy for me. It was when it came down to it, the difference of like what I could sell it for versus what I would make if I just closed it and sold the assets was $100K. And to be in a position to look at $100K and be like, you know what, that's just not worth my time. I can turn around in my other business and snap my fingers with 100% attention and effort and produce that $100K much faster. It was a no-brainer for me. And that's ultimately what it came down to was time and that $100K not being worth it.
Yeah. So just to reiterate what Taryn just said, she could sell her equipment for whatever that was, $30,000 or $40,000 or whatever, you know, and then like for another $100K, she could sell the whole business, which is like all the members and the lease and all the other assets you have. That difference of $100K, Taryn realized was not worth staying tied to the gym for now because she could make that $100K easier somewhere else. And I just want to restate that because it's important that Taryn actually broke this down to a number. A lot of gym owners will say like, oh, maybe I should just sell. But the reality is that number one, their business isn't worth anything yet. It's not worth it to sell. And number two, they don't have anything else that's worth more to go to. So what actually was it that made it worth it to you to exit and walk away from the $100K sale that you might have earned?
I mean, let me walk through kind of the steps. It literally boils down to 5 steps. It was build the gym to support my income needs and my lifestyle needs, which I did. Check. Build a business to allow me to invest in other income sources, other passive income sources. Check. I did that. I built an Airbnb empire. The next thing was take the time and attention and go and find other things that interest you. Check. I did that. I was like, hey, I'm going to become a mentor. I actually really love coaching in this space. take that interest and potentially start another business, which is what the path I chose was. So I started Perfect Day Business Mentorship. And that ultimately puts you in a position for step 5, which is now review all of the commitments that you have and things that are running. That does it align with your perfect day or whatever it is that you're moving towards? And you have this opportunity to choose cost of opportunity versus time. And so that's my my logical reasoning of how I went through everything and put myself in a position to have that opportunity to even take that chance, right? If you skip any of those steps, or it's not necessarily you have to open another business, but if you skip any of those steps, you're not going to be in a stable position to be able to make that decision, right? You're probably making that decision emotionally rather than logically.
So it's not that you have to start another business, but there has to be another opportunity that's, larger than the delta between what you have now and what you could get for it.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. And so, your opportunity was worth more than $100,000 more than you would earn if you kept the gym for another 6 months trying to find a buyer or did an owner finance buyout.
Yeah. I mean, because trying to split my attention between multiple things, which hey, I was on your podcast a year ago talking about how I'm an expert at doing this and I still abide by those things 100%. But putting 50% of my attention and energy into this new company of mine was still growing it at an exponential rate. And I knew that without 50% of my attention going towards the gym, just how much faster that would go. And so that opportunity was just greater than staying in the gym, just to stay in the gym at that point.
And I think that's what makes your story so interesting, Taryn, because in the fitness space, we see this a ton on Facebook. Wow, I got so emotional there. I hit my keyboard. But, we'll see people and they've got a gym that looks successful from the outside. And then the next thing you know, on Facebook, they're like, wow, it all comes to an end. Mission accomplished. We changed all these lives. 8 great years. Thank you so much. And then on LinkedIn, their profile is like, hey, I'm looking for a job as a realtor or something like that. It just doesn't feel like that was a successful exit. And the difference, I think, is that you've got a clear plan for the next step that's maybe going to have even more impact than what you're currently doing with the gym. So let's just what is that next step for you? And what do you tell people who want to sell their gym but don't have that next step mapped out yet?
The next step is do the thing. Get good at doing the thing, turn around and teach the thing. And then you can teach a broader audience the thing that it carries over to, right? Because the concepts are the same. And so the next step for me is continue building Perfect Day Business Mentorship, relocate my life to Arizona, because I now have the opportunity to do that and be able to run my business from anywhere in the world and build my lifestyle in the way that I wanted it to, the concept of you build this thing to do this thing so that you can turn around and continue doing other things. That's an amazing, that's the opportunity you want to get caught in. Right. And so that's the next step for me is I've done those things. Let's turn around. Let's teach other people how to do those things. And so I've had people come to me and we've had this conversation, people who are thinking about closing their gym or whatever it might be. But the first question is what replaces that income? You worked hard to get that income from the gym. It needs to be something that you're non-dependent on as you turn around and start focusing on other things. And can you supplement that with something else? Or is that opportunity greater thereof, whatever your next thing is, right?
Yeah. And that's exceptionally rare. I want to make this clear. Even though Taryn is she's got this mapped out step by step, she's still an absolute unicorn. Glassman explained this to me years ago, where he said there's a massive difference between being a good bricklayer and being a good teacher of bricklayers. And to be a good teacher of bricklayers is a magnitude harder. And Taryn is good at every one of those steps. So if you're tempted listening to this to say, I'm going to close down my gym and just start mentoring other business owners, you probably want to make your gym successful first,
Yeah, Coop, let me redirect this though.
Yeah.
When I first started as a mentee in Dubreuil, that's what it taught me to do, right? It was like Dubreuil taught me how to build a successful business. And then when I joined Tinker, it taught me how to be a successful entrepreneur. Tinker gave me the opportunity to turn around and find my next interest, to build the gym into a position where I had time and money available to me to do those things. So the trajectory of the storyline of how Two Brain Business builds successful gym owners is exactly how this played out. Just because I don't own a gym at the end of the story doesn't make it any less successful or less off the path of how that gym ownership progression is supposed to go. This is exactly how the storyline plays out. It might look a little bit different for others, but the process of how I got here is exactly what we teach inside. I didn't do anything different than anyone else has the opportunity to do.
But you did it better than almost anybody else. And I think I don't want you to miss that because you're too humble to admit it. So yeah, that's awesome. And that's what the next step is for you. You're working with other entrepreneurs locally and worldwide who own different types of businesses. That's super awesome. What to you was it worth to exit in the end? We know it was more than $100,000.
There's nothing tangible on it, but just I actually really like this question. Is hard to answer, but I really like this question.
Okay.
I spent 2 years thinking about this decision. I've worked really hard with Bonnie Skinner to come to why I was even entertaining this decision. And when I peeled away the surface level layers of, well, this is all I've ever done. I really love health and fitness. I'm a coach. This is all people know me. This is my identity. When you peel away all those surface layer things, at the end of the day, owning a gym for me and the things that I got away from owning a gym was a platform to create impact. I love helping people. I love helping people win. I don't care what that looks like. If that's you getting on your bike and riding today because you made a commitment to me to do that, or you go out there and you build a successful business, and that's the thing it doesn't matter. If I have this opportunity to help you take one step in the right direction in your life in any way, shape, or form, then that's what gives me purpose. And that's what the gym, it gave me a platform to do that. And so what I came to realize is that I have this platform. It exists in many different forms. And so all this is the next step to keep continuing influencing people and impacting them in just a different way. But the premise is still exactly the same. It just looks different nowadays.
That's awesome. So, Taryn, I'm tempted to leave it there, but I got one follow-up question. When you sign up an entrepreneur for Perfect Day Business Mentoring and they're not physically active at all, they have no fitness, they own a, whatever company, right? They're the CEO of IBM. How often do you tell them start working out?
I mean, it should be part of the process. Yeah. Your business is only going to take you so far. And I think one of the things I said the other day is that at the end of the day, your health is the only thing that's irreplaceable. Yeah. Your business could tank, you can build another business. Your marriage could break up, you can get another, you can make another marriage. Obviously, these are things I don't want to happen, but right. Everything is replaceable except your health. So if you don't take care of your health, your business doesn't matter.
Got it. So good. All right. Thanks, Taryn. Hey, John, welcome back to Run a Profitable Gym. And we're going to get into your history, but where I'd love to start is, why did you open a gym in the first place? And then how big did you build your gym empire? And then we're going to get into why and how you sold.
Wow. First time, maybe not the first time, but first time in a long time on this side of the microphone. And as always, thanks for having me. Yeah. I started my gym because I was 23 and wasn't good at making life choices. I had found CrossFit like many other people out there. It had transformed my life. I was working a corporate job that I hated. and CrossFit gym just seemed like an easy way to make a living, while you're hanging out with your coach friends and your members who you all love. And that story is one that I've heard a lot talking with Two Brain gyms, and one that doesn't play out as well. But the one thing I did have going for me was timing. So I started in my first gym in 2013, which I think was the best time in history to start a CrossFit gym. So despite having no clue what I was doing, I opened the door of my first gym with 100 members. I opened a second gym 6 months later, and that had 200 members from the get. And then from there, just continued to make stupid mistakes and learn as I go. At the peak, I had 5 gyms. We were doing just under about 2 million in annual revenue across the 5 locations. So that works out to, 400,000-500,000 ish per location, which was at the time really good for CrossFit. But now we hear of gym owners doing way more than that. And yeah, that was peak gym owner empire. So I don't want to go too long. So you can steer the conversation, Mr. Cooper.
Sure, man. But obviously, like with 5 gyms, you're not coaching classes anymore. You're being a CEO. You're a good CEO. I know personally, like you love that work. And at 2 million in annual revenue, you're doing pretty well. So what led you down the road of selling the first one and then eventually selling all of them?
Yeah. So doing pretty well, I wasn't making insane money. So I was operating out of New York City. So I wasn't operating in like 40% margin as some of the people here are. I was more in the 10 to 20%, depending on where we were. So 10 to 20%, 2 million, still pretty good. But if you're living in New York City, like that doesn't go a long way, right? Where some of you would hear that, and maybe if you're in Birmingham, Alabama, you're, the 3rd richest guy in the town in the New York City area. That gets you a starter home, maybe. So yeah, I was doing all right. But I was never somebody who was particularly passionate about programming, and I'd always been like particularly interested in the business element, and I kind of found my corner of the world just doing the marketing and sales for gyms. Like I love doing that for my gyms. That was the last piece of work that I delegated. And you're right, I was not coaching classes. In fact, like when I started to sell, I lived in a different country. So around 5 years of operating, I got an opportunity to do some marketing work for a much larger business, and they made an offer I couldn't refuse, basically. And so I had a great management team in place, and I literally picked up my family and moved to Canada. Canada. And I noticed that there was a little more opportunity for me there. And while the gyms were running themselves, there was no issue. There were other opportunities coming my way. So, at the time you were approaching me about taking a more serious role within Two Brain. There are some opportunities to buy some businesses that looked intriguing. And I was scared that I was one catastrophic event away from being pulled back into the gym and derailing all this opportunity that I had coming at me. And so, obviously didn't have a crystal ball, but we can talk about how I went through the sales process. I sold my last gym at the end of 2019. And so had I held onto those, which seemed like passive no-brainer investments to hold on to, I probably would have got my teeth kicked in, because having 5 gyms in the New York City area during COVID and not living in New York City sounds awful.
Yeah. So you developed skills in your gym first. You saw how those skills could translate to other things that created other opportunities for you outside of the gym. I'm guessing this is probably around 2018.
Yeah. I was building up expertise as someone who was a decent writer and marketer in that 2016 to 2018 timeframe. 2018 was probably when, I wasn't embarrassingly bad. I was starting to be okay at the skill of marketing, and I was getting better at sales. And yeah, I refined those crafts. I worked a corporate job for less than 2 years. So I have no formal sales and marketing training. It was all stuff learned through the School of Hard Knocks. So all 5 of my gyms were completely bootstrapped. New York City is one of the most, if not the most competitive gym market in the world. We're going against like venture funded concepts that were spending literally millions of dollars trying to get revenue or trying to get members. And I need to keep my doors open. My staff people paid. And the only way I could do that was by getting more members, because we had pretty high churn. Like, for context, it was like 7% monthly churn where we were in the Lower East Side. And I'm sure there were plenty of things we could do better operationally. But the reality is, where that gym is located, like, that's where you go, you work a job for a year or two, and then you leave. So there, you're just kind of fighting gravity there. Even if you're the best operator in the world, like, you're not going to have 1% churn in a gym in the Lower East Side. So you had to be good at marketing, or you would go out of business.
Okay. So, as we've heard from the other guests on this show too, like, one of the keys for them to decide to sell was that they had this other very clear established opportunity. They weren't just going to get a job working for a software company or something, or become a realtor. They already knew that this other thing was, like, clearly waiting for them, and they weren't jumping off a second cliff. You discover that, and then you say, okay, that's it, I'm going to sell. When you make that decision, are you thinking, like, I'm going to sell them all? Or is it like, I'm going to sell 1 or 2, buy back some time? Like, what went into that thought process?
Well, I sold 4 and I shut 1 down. So I had one that was just a dog. And from the moment I opened it, it was a dog. And that's a story for a whole different podcast. But that one was more of a liquidation. And that happened before the other 4. But I think I learned how fragile, even though the business was running well, like, that experience taught me how fragile some of this stuff was. Like, you're one operator away from just being dragged back into it, even at 5 gyms. And so I was looking on to the next thing, but I knew I wanted to sell all 4 of them, but I wanted to sell them one at a time, because there's 2 ways you can think about your exit. You can maximize for dollars, and then you can maximize for the transition as well. So in 3 of the sales, I sold to the general manager. So I sold to somebody who was on staff, and 2 of the 3 of them, they were already equity holders in the gym. And so while I didn't get top dollar for those sales, it provided me with, like, a quick close. It provided no disruption to the community. And it gave somebody who helped me succeed in the front end, which, while I was off in Canada making money doing what I love doing, they were supporting me as my business partner operating the gym. So, I felt like it was just, like, better to do that, and faster, and worked out well for them and worked out well for me. And then one of them, I just went for, as much money as I could possibly get. And so that one was the New York one with the higher churn.
So out of the 5, 1, you decide, I'm just going to close down, not worth fixing. 3, you sell to a staff person or an equity shareholder. And the last one, the 5th one, you sell to somebody else.
An outside party. Yeah. So that was a strategic buyer. That was someone who was just buying up gyms in the New York City area and had heard through the grapevine that mine was for sale.
Okay. Let's start with, just maybe going a little bit deeper on the, selling to an employee or an equity partner. Like, where did these equity partners come from? And how did you approach the employee about buying you out?
So they came from existing gyms. So from a very early, stage in the business, and for better or for worse, I was almost all in on salaried staff. And so I had people who stayed with me for a very long time and developed well. And this was like the era when everybody was leaving to start their own CrossFit gym.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And like, this was when CrossFit went from, a couple thousand to like 10,000 in like a 4-year span. One of my locations, we literally had a CrossFit like across the street. Like, you could see the sign of both gyms if you were standing on the sidewalk. So I would hire people and say, hey, like when I was in the key hiring phase, I had those 2 gyms I talked about initially that were successful. I said, hey, I got these 2 gyms that are successful. I'm going to open more. If you come work here, like you can get a stable coaching job. But like if you want to develop into an owner and your dream is to one day own a gym, like I want to facilitate that for you. And that's what I did. So, 3 of my staff members from those 2 locations went on to partner with me to open gyms. And then, I had a couple who went and did their own thing as well. So, but wow. Of those 3, like I always had the conversation like, hey, I will partner. I'll facilitate the finance. Like we got the sales and marketing thing dialed down. I can help you with that. And then when we set those like partnership agreements from the onset, we had exit provisions. So when we sat down at the table, we had very thorough agreements. And it's like, hey, if one partner wants to sell, this is how that process would work. This is how the financing would work. And that was a result of being burnt in a different business endeavor by like a guy who actually went to jail for being a bad human being. So I picked up that scar the hard way, but I knew going into these relationships that like, you want to have an eye on the exit, even if you don't have any plan to exit.
Smart to lay it out in advance, at least like, here's how we will put a value on this business. I think that's one of the smartest things that I've learned in our own Tinker program is when you take on a partner or even talk to somebody about potentially buying you, you don't have to agree on the price up front, but you need to agree on here's how we'll determine the price in advance. And then it's not even a negotiation. It's just like, here's the price. So when you sold to the person who was just buying up gyms, like an outside investor, did they approach you or did you see it happening and you went to them?
I had tasked one of my more resourceful staff members to do some outbound. So just, hey, mistering a bunch of other gyms in the area to just say, hey, we might be in play. Are you interested? And they heard about that through him. And that started the conversation.
How do you do that without your members finding out and like just jumping ship and devaluing your company?
Well, there wasn't an icon problem, right? Mm. So I hadn't been in that gym in over a year. So the fact that I was selling or the ownership was changing hands, like I don't think they cared because they weren't going to that gym because John Franklin owned it. And dealing with a strategic buyer, their intention was to keep the facility open and they'd probably want to keep the staff in place. Like the gym was doing well and it was profitable. And so there's no reason for them to fire the staff or make dramatic changes to the community. And yeah, like the reason there are so many good deals to be had off market with the gym space is because people are deathly afraid of like listing their business on the internet. They don't want people to find out that they're looking to sell. If you go through like a business broker, there's like pieces of, you can have a little bit of anonymity, but I don't think that's like a huge deal if your members find out, especially if you're transparent about why and your intentions, right? Like I don't think just because you're thinking about selling or you're transitioning into a different career or you want to move or anything like that, like that's instantly the reason why everyone's going to leave, unless you're somebody who's coaching every single one of the classes, in which case your gym isn't worth anything anyway.
Good point. I think a lot of gym owners, they're so secretive about it that like only one person knows about it. And so they're really weighing only that one bid, So how did you determine a number in the last case where the outside buyer came in, you didn't have a pre-existing contract that said, here's how we'll determine a value? So
business valuation, I've learned, is more art than science. But the reality is, if you're selling a single location gym, your sales price is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 3 times earnings. So profit. If the gym, So not if revenue. Your net owner benefit or seller discretionary earnings is what the business buyer community would be, but it's the profit plus whatever, perks you get from owning the business added back in. So if that number is 100,000, depending on a bunch of different variables, your gym's roughly worth somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 300,000.
Right.
So for mine, obviously I was an absentee owner, so I wasn't taking a salary from the business. That was a huge advantage. It had good staff in place and there were strong systems. So there was an operating history and a history of profitability. So, my sales prices were more towards the higher end of that range. For that particular instance, for the ones where I was selling to staff, it was more towards the middle to lower side of that range because I was prioritizing speed and a good transition, right? So the way I was thinking about it was kind of like going through a process that would take 6 months to a year and a bunch of stress. Like for context, the one that I sold to the other party took more effort and time and stress and legal fees than the other three combined by like a massive margin. And so had I done that process for another 4 times to maybe squeeze out an extra, 100 to 300,000 throughout the process, where I was at the time and the opportunities I was looking at, that wasn't worth it to me. But depending on your specific circumstance, that's what you need to consider as well, because selling a business is not like selling a car. It is a pain in the ass and it takes an incredibly long time.
So what are some things, John, that would erode that value? So let's say like I'm making $100,000 a year in profit from my gym and I'm going to sell for 300,000, what are some things that would knock that number down from the 300,000 mark? I guess, you mentioned
you're the face. It's called, so Chris Cooper training, Chris Cooper classes. Everybody wants to train with Chris Cooper. I'm definitely going to be, as a buyer, I'm going to say, well, if Chris Cooper leaves, that's a problem. That's definitely a risk I want to take. So putting your name on the door and being the icon of that business is definitely a negative when it comes time to sell. And then people are going to look at your lease. So if you have a lease that is month to month, then you can get kicked out at any specific time. Or if you have an above market lease, or the landlord in transition requires some buyer to take on some massive personal guarantee. That is something that hurt me in a couple of my sales where like the lease wasn't as good or optimized as it could have been. And that's not something you're thinking about ahead of time. There's systems and processes. So like, will the gym run well for the new owner? And profitability is a reflection of that. Like if you're over 100,000 before your salary kicks in, like you have to have decent systems to hit that with a small brick and mortar gym. And then contracts is another one. So, I think the prevailing wisdom in the CrossFit community is everything should be month to month, which is fine, right? Like you have confidence in your community, but if you're, and if you're selling to a strategic buyer, they may overlook that. But if you're selling to someone who isn't from the gym space, they're going to have more comfort buying and they're going to be comfortable buying at a higher price if they know, 97% of the membership base is locked into a 1-year contract and can't leave. So that's something to consider when you're making the decision of whether to go month to month or enforce contracts in your business.
Okay. Yeah, that's great stuff, man. Another thing that I think you kind of alluded to is that it's not just that you're the face of the business, but if you're actually working in the business, and you're paying yourself for doing some of the coaching, that is not going to be appealing to an outside investor who doesn't want to buy themselves a job.
Right. And there are certain elements where it's easier to tell a story, right? So if I'm the guy doing the sales and marketing and I'm selling my business, I can just spin up like, hey, there's an agency down the street that does exactly what I do. It costs $1,000 a month. Let's bake that into the pro forma and calculate earnings off of that. Right. Where if it's like you're the guy on the floor, it's just such a relationship business that there's no way I'm kind of getting around that as a potential buyer.
Okay. Well, John, thanks a lot, man. Like, I think a lot of people are going to be really interested in this interview because you touched on like, what are the prerequisites for you to sell? You had a bigger opportunity. You had somebody that would kind of carry on the legacy of the gym and had passion to grow it. And also like the timing was right. And I really want people to understand that too. Like, just because you're ready to sell your gym for $13 today, it's often a good idea to take 6 months, build it up into something really great, and then sell it so that you get the reward you've been working toward for the last decade.
Hey, happy to help. And if anybody wants to shoot a question by me, John at twobrainbusiness.com, I'm happy to help you out.
Great. Thanks, buddy. Hey, if you're thinking about, should I sell my gym? Should I exit? You want to ask yourself, what's the next step for me? And if you can't figure out what that next step, if there is no clear next step, keep your gym, make it big, and then sell it. Make it worth selling. For a lot of people, that process looks exactly the same as fixing their gym. And to be honest with you, over 100 times, I've had gym owners sign up with Dubreuil and say, I want to make my gym saleable. Right now, it's not worth anything if I'm not here. They go through the program. 4 months into it, they're like, actually, I like my gym again. I love it again. I want to keep it. This happened to me, and I was 20 years into gym ownership, so I get it. But whether you want to build it to sell or build it to keep, hey, the process is largely the same. You've got to make your gym successful, or it's not going to be worth anything. I'm Chris Cooper. This is Run a Profitable Gym. And if you want to talk more about this, go to gymownersunited.com. That's our free Facebook group. There are 9,300 gym owners in there from around the world talking candidly, openly, and without judgment about these very topics.